Hi everybody, welcome to Tuesday Talks at Cure. My name is Seema Kumar, I'm the CEO of Cure. So today we have the incredible privilege to speak with Esther Dyson. She is an innovation pioneer, she's a renowned founder and investor, a strong advocate for equity and prevention in healthcare. And we're going to talk today about her career journey from being a journalist to an early pioneer in explaining all things digital, when digital was not like a famous word at the time, to becoming an entrepreneur herself and both in wellness, healthcare, and she is also an angel investor, journalist, best-selling author, commentator, philanthropist, and the executive founder of Wellville. It's a 10-year non-for-profit project, right, focused on improving healthcare and promoting equitable well-being in the United States. Hi, Esther. Welcome. It's great to have you here.
Thank you for the introduction. Now we're done.
Now we're done. Yeah, I know. But I mean, you are what we call a polymath, right? You've got so many different things that you've done, which gives you a holistic view of what healthcare is all about and where are we headed and what do we need to really fight for, not for cure, but for prevention is what you're after. But before we get into all of that, I want to talk a little bit about, we were talking about Princeton before the show started, and I live in Princeton, and so I love the place, or near Princeton, I should say, and you grew up in Princeton, right? Both of your parents were there. They were scientists, and your neighbors were Robert Oppenheimer, Albert Einstein. You were like there right in the middle of history, growing up in this bubble of genius, right? What was it like? I mean, gosh, I just watched, Oppenheimer the second time. And then, just thinking about Einstein and Oppenheimer and some of the golden age of physics. I mean, what was it like growing up?
It felt totally normal.
Yeah?
Pretty much everybody grows up in what they think is normal. So
yeah.
I met Einstein, yes, everybody asks, but I was much more interested in Mrs. Pennypacker, my first grade teacher.
Oh!
She had more influence over me in the real world.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, a woman in science, right?
But
yeah.
I don't know, she was just a first grade teacher.
She was just a first grade teacher, okay.
Let's be real.
Let's be real.
No, it was a great place because we roamed around. Our parents were, this is when we would go play in this old shed where the remains of the first ENIAC were being stored.
Wow.
And we used to go up and down the elevators in the Institute until they put in a policy about anybody under 10 couldn't do that.
Wow, yeah. But before they put the policy in place, you got to experience all of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, how much of a big influence did it have on you to be just growing up around what felt normal to you, but really from the outside in, somebody would say, oh my God,
yeah.
You were surrounded by genius, and it must have influenced you in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah, certainly my parents influenced me to ask questions.
Yes.
All the time about everything.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. So it's part of being a journalist, it's part of being a fact checker, it's part of being a good investor, it's certainly part of being a scientist. And honestly, in the age of AI, I already know how to write good prompts.
Well, that comes in handy, right? Now we are in the age of AI. So why were you so focused on the why versus the what? When, as a fact checker, as somebody who's a journalist, why focus on the why rather than the what?
Well, the what is the surface. What does this house look like? Or its door is wooden, there are these 3 windows. But what's really interesting is if there's a storm, which way will the house fall?
Yeah.
Or what part of it will, just how do things work? And then that explains why things are, which is much more interesting. And when you get into AI, probably someone once asked me, what's the most exciting new technology? And I said, counterfactuals.
Oh, explain that.
What is not true, and what could you do to make it true or to prevent it from happening? But understanding, so in my nonprofit work, I go into communities and you can look at the kids and say, well, one-third of them are going to drop out of high school. All kinds of bad things will happen. They've been damaged before they even got to school. And one thing is predicting that. Much more interesting is saying, well, what would have to change for that not to happen? And AI can perpetuate biases, but it can also look underneath to figure out how to change those outcomes.
That's really interesting because most people are inclined to say, okay, this is what's going to happen. How are we going to solve for this? But instead, if you say, if there is one root cause that could actually turn the table.
Or even several root causes. Intermingled.
Yeah, that are intermingled, and where AI comes into play is you can sort of take the algorithm of several root causes and like try to figure that out, right? That's very interesting. And in the 1980s, you left Forbes, right, to work on Wall Street, where you covered startups, like Federal Express. I can't even imagine. Federal Express was a startup, right? Unbelievable, yeah.
They had raised $100 million, and they were now doing a down round at $15 million pre-money valuation, and they hadn't yet shipped a package. So that was my model of what a startup should be like. But also what was really interesting, that was the days before we could handle complexity. So everything got shipped to Memphis overnight, because packages don't mind that.
Yes.
And then they got shipped out the next morning. So even to send something from here to downtown New York, it would actually go to Memphis.
And come back.
Because the simplicity was cheaper than the possibility of exceptions. And then, of course, over time it changed, and everything got dynamically rooted and scheduled and so forth and so on. And I was doing something else before they got totally along that path. But it was a great logistics, Slack, exception handling, statistics. It was wonderful,
right? Yeah. That's great. And now we can just order on Amazon and it shows up on your door like in 10 minutes, right? Usually, yes, if you're lucky.
Complexity rules.
Complexity rules. So, but then you went into healthcare. How did that happen?
Okay, well, there was a few things in the middle.
Yes.
25 years of running a conference and a newsletter about the emerging internet technology world and so forth. And the conference was called PC Forum, as in Personal Computer Forum. This was from 1982 to 2007. By the end, PC Forum stood for Platforms for Communication Forum, but we never had to change the name. And it was wonderful. This was Bill Gates and Steve Jobs would come to my conference. Later on, it ended with Mark Zuckerberg and Reid Hoffman and people like that. And I got to observe everything with no real institutional credit. It was just, I call it present without leave. You're just there without being invited. And if you say useful enough things, they'll let you keep coming if you also keep their secrets. So after that, after that, I did a bunch of things, including training as a cosmonaut in Russia. And
okay, all right, explain that to me.
So my dad,
Yeah.
Vladimir Zworykin, the Russian who created color TV for RCA. My dad was doing stuff with NASA, and the Russians, of course, in space. So it also seemed quite normal to talk to Russians. And we knew the Russians were good, even though the Russian government was bad, still true. And so I learned Russian in high school and also got interested in space travel. And anyway, long story, ended up training for 6 months as a backup to Charles Simoni, the guy who wrote Microsoft Word. And of course, a lot of expensive insurance in case you go up into space and so forth. And the worst thing that happened to him or me was he was bitten by a rabid dog on campus. And had to
you had to be the backup in case he was...
I think for a moment he suspected it was my fault. But anyway, he got the shots, and it was early enough so that he went up and I didn't get to go. But my father and stepmother and my brother did managed to come out to Kazakhstan to see the launch, which was quite wonderful.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you actually saw him go up. You were there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and so it's interesting, but this gets sort of to social determinants of health, believe it or not. In Star City, which is a government facility and so forth, the food was horrible. The education was useful, but not very well delivered. The privacy was non-existent. On the other hand, if you lost something, people knew everything. So, they would bring me my hat that I'd left at, some training facility or something. And then when we went to Baikonur, which is a training facility, so there were 3 backups and then 3 cosmonauts, and they were going up for Russia. They were risking their lives for the greater glory, and there was a real mission there. And there was this lady who'd been cutting the astronauts' hair for like 20 years, and so she cut my hair just for fun. And there were NASA astronauts too being trained, because at that point we had no lift of our own after the shuttle disasters and so forth. And the food was...
Maybe that was training for what you would eat on space.
No. Yeah. The food in space was horrible. And we got to test that too. And so, but this was like, this might be these brave men's very last meal. They are sacrificing themselves for... And so every dish was brought out as if it was a birthday cake.
Oh, wow.
And it was delicious. It was just... And that goes to...
The social determinants of health. Yeah.
Believe it or not.
Yeah.
Anyway, I was on the board of 23andMe. I thought all the astronauts should be genotyped, and of course, they all saw that as a way to be prevented from flying, so nobody wanted to do that, though that has now changed.
Yeah.
But I got more and more interested in healthcare.
But before you got interested in healthcare, you did something called Adventures, right?
Adventure was the company that owned the newsletter and the conference.
Okay, yeah.
With my initials.
With your initials. Okay, now light bulb just went off. ED, Adventures, okay, got it, yeah. So 23andMe, so you got involved because of this whole experience, here, training to be a cosmonaut. Is that what led you to sort of thinking about genotyping and...
No, it was much more about healthcare, right? I don't want to spend too much time on all this, but it just seemed like something fundamentally more useful than, markets for dog shampoos and a lot of frivolous stuff. So I also interviewed this guy called Charlie Silver, who had a company called Real Age that you may have run into. You fill in some sort of social determinant-y things, but not about poverty, more about what you eat. Do you have a loved one living with you? Do you have a pet? And of course, how much do you weigh and all that stuff. And it would give you, quote, your real age, which has now become an obsession for people. Yeah. And in my piece, I wrote this thing has been, I'm sure, far more useful to most people's health than thousands of doctors. And I thought it was kind of ironic, and but the truth is always a mix of comedy and tragedy. Anyway, he ended up selling this company to Hearst, and then they sold it to ShareCare. But what was really interesting, and this, I put it in my story, was the company that he sold his previous company to, and that was Jiffy Lube.
Jiffy Lube.
Oil changes.
Wow.
Maintenance.
Wow.
Oh my gosh, we take better care of our cars. We repair them more we maintain them more regularly than we do with our bodies.
I know.
And I was...
But if we had like check engine lights and little, lights that came on,
we just don't pay
right?
attention.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah. No. Go ahead. That's what we
don't. I mean, you can look at your fingernails, or again, check your weight or your running speed or whatever it is. The signs are there. Let's get real. Anyway, I began to think about that. Then I was on the judging panel of the Healthcare X Prize. And that never happened. I think in part because the PDF that they were handing out, the idea was take a population of people with some disease or condition or whatever. And anyway, this PDF said, so if we reduce heart attacks by 20% and diabetes by 30% or something like that, we've already got a 50% improvement. And anyway.
So what did you do with that when you saw that
I
information?
just looked at it in horror. And anyway, it didn't ever happen. But I thought we really need a health X Prize anyway, not a health care X Prize. And that was the origin of what ended up becoming Wellville. It was started as a contest and ended as a collaboration.
Yeah, so talk a little bit about what that is. What does that mean, Wellville, and why that name, and what were you hoping to accomplish?
Oh, the name was just a clever name for,
Yes.
well, it was originally called Health Information Coordinating Council, which was a terrible name.
Yeah.
But I wanted it not to be.
I want to be part of Wellville. Yeah.
I wanted it not to be shiny, and it was actually called Hiccup, sort of like Meetup. But I hired a CEO, and the first thing he did was say, "Are you really wedded to that name?" And I said, "Find me something better," and he did.
Yeah.
So I knew I would learn a lot. I knew there was a real problem there, and I'd gotten lucky in the stock market. So I didn't go in with expectations of what would happen. I wanted to raise money for some kind of prize, but I didn't call it a prize. I think we did use the word contest at the beginning. But it ended up, I couldn't raise money, it was too weird. And the community said, we don't want to compete with one another anyway, we want to learn from each other. And so it changed quite a bit. It was originally going to be 5 years, 5 metrics, 5 communities. It ended up 10 years. More insights than metrics, to be honest. And we partly got a free pass because of COVID on a lot of data. And it's been an amazing learning experience about which I'm going to write a book. So it's all stuff. Nobody has ever said to me, the stuff you're doing at Wellville is stupid. I did have one VC right in the beginning say, oh, Esther, that's so sweet, but 10 years from now, everybody's going to have a Fitbit. And I really wanted to say, Fred or Henry or whatever, you should really fly commercial more often. But I mean, it was clear the problem was poverty and social conditions.
Yes.
And it was not a lack of health care. So we went to the communities. Rick, the CEO, who's from Cigna and sort of knew that field, we had a very nice application form that was long and complicated. 42 communities applied. You had to be under 100,000 people and have a cross-sector collaborative applying. So we looked not for the 5 best, but for the best group of 5, so that we'd have diversity of
information
of people, of structural organizations. We were very excited about Niagara Falls, the mayor's task force for a healthier Niagara Falls, but it ended up that task force was mostly a bunch of local real estate people, and they thought housing was the solution to everything. And at the other end, we came to meet with the mayor and a bunch of people, including the pastor who officiated at, I think, the first gay wedding in New York State. And he looked at us and said, we've seen your kind before. You come in, you stay a year or two, you hand out some money, and then you leave. We don't need that. And he was absolutely right, even though that wasn't what we were trying to do.
Yes.
That was the reality.
Yes.
So after about 3 or 4 years, Niagara Falls and we split up. It was like, we're not going to pretend it's working. It's not. We don't want to waste your time. And North Hartford tried to hire Rick, our CEO, so we just invited North Hartford to be a Wellville. It took us 3 or 4 years to understand what the problems were, how we could help, not with money and not with So how many of you here are out of tech and know what a value-added reseller is? Okay, so imagine software, this amazing software, it's AI perhaps, and it can do amazing stuff. So the chief information officer buys it, and then the people don't use it. It doesn't know how to talk to the systems you've got, and there's nobody there to teach them to use it, and they're really busy. You want me to study this manual? I've got to. So a value-added reseller was a very expensive operation that would make this software useful, and that's why even open source software can actually be the basis of a good business. Anyway, all these ideas about what these communities should do, people are busy.
Yeah.
They're not looking for new ideas. They're trying to make what they want to do work.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's training them to do stuff. So the challenge is very much like raising kids.
Yeah.
It's how do you find their intrinsic motivation rather than bribing them to do their homework, which doesn't last. And
so your biggest insight then from all of this, you're almost at the end of it, right? Is what would you say, like maybe 1 to 3 key insights from it that you think we need to be thinking about?
Yeah, and I have quadrant charts for these.
Yeah.
So imagine, lower left corner, there's all me, all the time, right now. And that is the socially undesirable, I'm using the word that you shouldn't use anymore, the drug addict who's simply lost their sense of the past, lost any sense of agency for the future. And another thing, Black people get othered and discriminated against. Native Americans often get just disappeared. And in a sense, much of the drug addict's life has disappeared. They've probably been distanced from their family. And it's short-term thinking. Then there's the benevolent billionaire, gives the drug addict $1,000. The drug addict spends it on drugs and maybe a little food, but nothing changes. And then the billionaire thinks long-term and invests, and the word invest I mean on purpose, $100 million in a hospital wing so that his wife will be cured of cancer when she gets sick. And he, of course, funds his college so that his kids can get accepted. And then in the upper right-hand corner is what we're really looking for, which is long-term thinking and breadth of vision around your community. And that is the fundamental problem of our society as a whole right now. It's not just poor communities. It's take a pill, don't look for the cause. It's in the communities we work in, it's community organizations that get addicted to short-term grants. So they don't have their own purpose. I've got these 2 part-time coordinators, I've really got to pay them. I love them, I'm nice, but I need that short-term grant. And meanwhile, in many cases, the philanthropies are dealers and enablers. They foster competition. You spend too much money writing the grant proposal, and they interfere. They don't ask you what you want to do. They won't ask you what your problems are. And they also, it's not sustainable. I was not in the meeting, but there was one example where some guy in one of these places sitting at a board meeting said, yeah, this program has been successful stopping teen pregnancies. Now let's go do something more innovative. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, long-term thinking about the whole community, and that, ultimately we need the federal government to. So the second issue is when you're rich, if you keep making bets that are 60% or more likely to pay off, you get rich. Slowly or quickly, it accumulates, and when you lose, when you go down below zero, you still have enough wealth. You have the safety net. If you're poor, you can't afford to take sensible risks. Because you don't have any, like in FedEx, you don't have any slack in your system. So you can't get a better job. You can't go get the training.
Yeah.
You're constrained. And if you fall in the hole, you can't get out. So there's the difference between wealth and income. They focus way too much on income. And, then there's the whole finding, so there's this great book by Alison Gopnik about raising children called The Gardener and the Carpenter. Her message is basically never imagine that your child, that you can construct your perfect child. You just, there's a seed here, you have to help it turn into the best thing it can ever be. And it's the same in these communities. Don't come in with your better idea. Certainly ask them questions, make them think what they want, make them think how they could solve the problem, make them think what the problem is. But our job was to be a catalyst and a discovery agent. It wasn't to, and again,
It wasn't to actually mess with the communities, quote unquote, or to empower them, but not come in from the top down.
Right. I mean, like simulated annealing. A little bit of disruption and things will maybe settle down better. But just, they understand better what they need, and if they don't, maybe good questions can help them, but don't come in. So we're not giving them fish, we're not even teaching them to fish, we're trying to help them build their own fishing schools. And so now as we leave this year, our final gathering, so every year we have an annual gathering, some person said, this final gathering, it sounds like a funeral. And I said, no, it's a commencement.
Yes,
it's
graduation,
And we're not even leaving you, we're just sending you onwards, and we want to, we'll still be in touch, we want to help you do it for yourselves, but at some point, what we're doing is not sustainable, and that's kind of the point. We need society to make the kind of work we do and the kind of work the community can do for itself if it has that underpinning of sustainability. That's what needs to be sustainable, and what this country, instead of spending on healthcare, needs to spend on health, and it needs to invest in health and human capacity.
Because God, if you think about the amount of money we spend on healthcare, fixing the immediate, right?
Things that shouldn't have been broken.
The things that shouldn't have been broken. I mean, like, how do you kind of, flip it on its head? How do you make that happen? I mean, that's really what needs to happen, right? Where's the tipping point for that?
Well, writing one book is not going to do it. But I am trying to I'm trying to jump on the wave and help accelerate a bit, because it's not as if, again, I've never had anybody say to me, what you're saying is crazy. They have said, it's impossible, perhaps. And right now we have more and more visibility of the predatory nature of so much healthcare. That people are beginning to realize we need to fix this. And I mean, the biggest thing right now is the mental health of kids. And okay, the worst thing I read in a long time, though it happened this past week, a company that offers, it markets to kids online. It says basically, we'll create a digital twin for you so that it can talk to your friends for you and answer their questions. And I mean, number one,
why?
Who wants that? Number two, can you imagine the digital twin actually telling the truth versus the kid is always happy and they love their dog? And that was truly terrifying.
Terrifying. But we have one question for you, for me, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So we're talking about the next generation, the young and aspiring journalists, investors, community leaders. What's the one piece of advice you have for them?
Always, well, I have several, but number one is my signature, always make new mistakes. Second is always be asking questions. And third, never take a job for which you are already qualified. And there's a qualification to that because, again, you have to be pretty privileged to do that, to get someone to invest in you. But it really is the best way to learn.
That's fabulous advice. The last one especially, got to remember that. Well, I want to open it up to the audience. I'm sure you all have questions. Anybody want to go first? Yes.
Hi, Misha Petrubo. I have a question for you. You said that you started with metrics and then eventually you went more to just getting a sense about how did you actually measure the progress, or how do you get a sense of whether the initial ideas have actually been met and how you measure the progress of the project?
Yeah. Well, for lots of specific things, you can do things like measuring the success of a diabetes prevention program. My real measure of success would probably be two things. High school graduation rates, which again, COVID kind of messed with. And I would do a poll of local real estate people and say, do people want to move in or are they moving out? Those are the real indicators. We have a data person who's collecting a lot of data, and trends are very wonky. I think in each community, a lot of things have gotten better and there is data, but it's much more subtle. Are the people feeling engaged? Are they having their voice heard? So the reality is there's a lot of corruption in these places. I was talking to a guy who does police analytics to find corruption, and he said, they come in clusters. And I said, yeah, the bad ones infect the good ones. And he said, no, lady, you're wrong. What really happens is the bad ones collect in the bad neighborhoods because that's where they can behave with impunity. So the worst cops come to our neighborhoods. And that's...
So it's a downward spiral.
Yeah, and trying to fix that and getting people to fight back and kicking out the mayor who got a $17 million government grant for COVID relief and wanted to build a city boat dock. Guess what the mayor owned?
Yep.
So there's progress, but it's lumpy. And next year we will have lots of data about all the things that got better, but there were also a bunch of things that got worse, both in our communities and in the states surrounding them. So the metrics are, high school, whatever, the usual ones. And you can get blue zones to survey people and so forth and so on. But it's more a question of people know if things are getting better or worse. And you have to go after the institutions that have some capacity because they're willing to share and collaborate. If you're struggling for your life, even if you're a soup kitchen, you're going to see the other soup kitchens as competition. So in some sense, it's the healthcare system needs to be demonopolized and the good works need to be more single payer.
We have a question over there.
Hi, Ms. Dyson. Hi, Seema. My name is Lippy Roy. I'm a physician, and I specialize in addiction medicine. And while I got trained in traditional Western medicine, it wasn't until I really got my first primary care job as a primary care doctor to Boston's homeless population, and where I learned a year later that the cause of death was drug overdose. And I got trained in addiction medicine. I then worked at Rikers Island. I bring these topics up because, as you clearly identified, it's all these other factors that are really contributing to health. It's not just medicines, right? It's and I work now part-time in a methadone clinic, and I launched a company, Cita Med, to really address these stress-related conditions. So one of my questions for you is, what do we need to do differently in terms of not only reforming medical curricula, but how to really empower healthcare professionals and other decision makers like judges and elected officials, policymakers who don't have the same training or experience as we do to really make meaningful and sustainable changes? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to you more afterwards. I mean, my basic prescription would be, I wrote an article, you can find it in weird form on LinkedIn or on theinformation.com called Don't Fuss About Training Your AIs, Train Your Babies. And courtesy of the information, which made me make it much more useful than it began, there are people who train people. There are teachers and professors, and they are sort of the top level. Then there are the people in the middle who train other people as part of a job. You know, HR managers and people in companies. This is how we treat our customers. And then there are the frontline trainers, and of course doctors are in the middle there. They and much more the nurses and the other people train people about their health and their emotions and so forth. And then there are the frontline trainers, which are the parents and the siblings and the other kids. And one other problem with AI is, and with COVID and so many other things, kids are not being trained to be better humans. They're actually being trained to interact with, you know, fake friends. It's terrifying. And so I'd rather start with that message than even worry about the judges, because we need to do all of that. And we also don't need to reverse what they were doing in Oregon to try and make things better. But it really starts very, very early. For what it's worth, ARPA-H is doing something called a HEROES program, looking at outcomes.
Yes, we did a talk with the person who's leading the HEROES.
Darshak,
yes, yeah.
So they're looking at 4 outcomes, to their credit, not we have this protocol we want you to follow. And 2 of them are sort of emergency alcohol overuse pickups and opiate overdoses. Yeah, the very, very end of the problem. One is cardiovascular, and then the one that really appealed to me was serious obstetric complications. And to reduce those, you know, you're not trying to reduce the obstetric complications. You're trying to help the mother eat right, avoid drugs, et cetera, so she has a healthy pregnancy, and then the baby comes out, and then you train her, ideally, though that's less. I mean, postpartum, you still want to support her. And the irony of this one is, it's a great thing because, yeah, it actually has a fairly short-term outcome, and the ARPA program is lasting for 3 years, which I would argue is too short. But the reality is, I bet you if you did a retrospective study in 20 years, the kids, those mothers versus controls, would be much healthier and happier. Yeah, not so that you go write a book about it, but nurse-family partnership has proved to everybody's satisfaction that whether it's a doula or a midwife or a trained nurse or just somebody helping the mother through makes a huge impact and a huge ROI on your financial investment 15 and 20 years later.
Yes, sir. I think we have time for one more question. And yeah.
Hi. Building on his question, how are you measuring tribalism in well-being and advancement of groups and society in general? Have you looked at the impact of or increased tribalism in the country?
Not directly, no. I mean, this is very useful for me. I'm learning. I'm going to get challenged about my data a lot, and I need to get better at answering those questions. We have a whole bunch of data, and I haven't looked at it that much lately because I'm so busy actually doing the work. But I don't think that's something we are looking at in those terms at all. But I will start focusing more on our data because people are going to start asking us. I mean, not that they haven't, but yeah, thank you very much.
And I think we're going to try to, Wendy, is your question short?
The question is the answer short?
Yes.
I'll try and be brief.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, hi, I'm Wendy Diller. I'm a writer, and my question, two questions actually. One is there a business model here at all? And then the other question is the data that had to do with the data, and do you collect longitudinal data, and who and what kind, and who has access to it?
The short answer, there is absolutely no business model. You need somebody who got rich in the stock market, or who was born rich, or who knows. But it's been a 10-year labor of love, and also of learning. The second question, we don't collect that much data. The communities do. I mean, our partners are public health, governments, school systems. So there's a lot of data around. The question is looking at it, and I mean, the reality is attribution is very difficult. Was it these guys from Wellville, or was it United Way, or was it just the school system changed? So there's a lot of data. Making sense of it is going to be a job for a very good AI.
Yeah, and that is, where, there could be a treasure trove of information there.
Yeah, there will be. I mean, these are
yeah.
interesting places. There's no real control, but all the neighboring counties in some sense are. And of course, as you've read so many times, move over one county and you have a completely different socioeconomic system. But you can see divergent trends are very useful.
Yeah. What's your book going to be called?
Don't rent your communities, in parentheses, health, from an absentee landlord.
Okay.
Yeah, purposely wonky.
Purposely wonky, yes. So maybe Rick has a suggestion for something more pithy.
Well, no, that one, I want to
be yours.
What the British say is, it does what it says on the tin. It is going to be a pretty wonky book.
That's great. That's great. We're looking forward to it. Thank you, Esther. It's just been a real pleasure. I feel like we've barely scratched the surface, but we want to leave some time for people to mingle and ask more questions. And clearly, there's many more follow-up conversations on this. And good luck with the book.
Thank you. I'll do my book party here.
That's great. All right. I'm going to hold you to it. Book party. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining. And please come back next week. We will see you again for another Tuesday Talk. Thank you all.